Hello, this is Sheila Bender, and you're listening to In Conversation, discussions on writing and the writing life. Today, we're talking with Kathryn Trueblood about her fiction writing and history of publication. Here's her bio. Kathryn Trueblood has written The Baby Lottery, which was a Book Sense pick in 2007. She was awarded the 2013 Goldenberg Prize for Fiction, which was judged by Jane Smiley and sponsored by the Bellevue Literary Review. In 2011, she won another award from the Red Hen Press Short Story Award and was also selected for a grant from the Barbara Deming Memorial Fund, the oldest feminist funding agency in the U.S. Trueblood's latest story, Diary of a Slut, was published by She Books, a new digital publisher of women's writing. Her stories and articles have been published in Poets and Writers magazine, the Bellevue Literary Review, the Los Angeles Review, Glimmer Train, the Seattle Review, Zizova, and most recently in Referential. She is a professor of English at Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington, where she teaches creative writing, editing, and publishing, 1960s lit, and the literature of war. Kathryn, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I'm so eager to talk about your work, and as I read your awards and book titles, I was remembering how I read online of your interest in writing about women and about women's lives in some ways that perhaps have been neglected in a lot of the writing we've been reading. So I wanted to start by asking you a question about your interest in writing about parenting with illness was one of the issues that I came across that I thought, you're right, I don't think I ever have read about that. And I have a sense that you do this through fiction.
I do, and it's been interesting to me. I just noticed T. Fromm's most recent novel is also a narrative about a mother who gets MS, but there's a lot of chronic illness in the world and autoimmune illness. I suppose as a teacher, I also see people who are quite young, whose parents have been sick or who they themselves are sick, and the society likes to feed us this thing I call it's the epiphany narrative. It's the redemption narrative. So you get sick, but then you have this marvelous spiritual knowledge, so really you're fine with having gotten sick. I think it's so limiting for people and so isolating for people who are trying to parent and work and cope with it, and or trying to be a child who has a parent who's ill. A lot of times, unfortunately, people fall into what I call the chaos narrative, which is you can get ill and then lose your job and then lose your house. And I've met many children who've lived through the chaos narrative with their families, and so that just became very important to me. And when I was quite ill, I only found one or two books about parenting with illness. There are tons on parenting sick children, but the ones that are out there just kept this very clinical distance, and there wasn't much comfort there. So I decided to write these stories that are in the Medicated Marriage book that's, I hope, coming out soon.
Can you tell us something about how your stories are delivering empathy or information that parents who have illness might really resonate with?
I think I can say things about that. One of the things that's important for people who are newly ill is to realize that it's not always going to be that way forever, and that they have to learn to deal with their fear. In some cases, the fear is almost worse than whatever the symptoms are. And so I think once you get a set of tools, you say to yourself, oh, here, this is happening again, but I know what to do. The other thing I found is that the books that were out there seem to be very much slated to the middle class. It's like, oh, get a team of parents and other people who can help you. My friends all work. They're all busy, and it's not, I don't have this sort of a contingent of people I can call upon to help me, and I don't think most people do. The other thing is the children themselves. You know, the books kind of treat the children as though they're little mini adults who will be reasonable. And in fact, when I was in bed, my kids, they wanted to make me mad, because if I came out of the bed like a she-bear, at least they were reassured that I had my energy, that I was vital still. And so those were some tough years for us, and I talked to my kids about it. My next book would be a nonfiction book addressing this subject.
So can you tell us briefly about one of the stories and how the illness of the parent weaves into a story?
Yes, I can. I wrote The No-Tell Hotel, which is the story that won the Goldenberg Award. It's really the story of a mother the No-Tell Hotel is her house. All of the teenagers who've been kicked out of their homes after high school end up staying at her house. And she's taking care of a friend who has MS, and his that person's child comes over to her house a lot. But when the boy is away from his mother who has MS, she tries to keep tabs on his mother because the boy is actually his mother's caretaker. And this is based on a story and a friend that I lost. So I felt very compelled to write it. There were no easy answers in this situation at all.
And yet just articulating and evoking the situation is certainly an important place to start and have people understand that this is so.
My scope is larger than illness. At first I thought, well, if I write about illness, nobody will want to read it. And then when I won the Goldenberg Award, I was so heartened, I went on. But I also am looking at how medicated we are as a society, right? Many, many children are put on medication for behavior modification. Sometimes it seems like the whole darn family is medicated. And we've reached a point where even if we test our water, there's Prozac in the water. So there are people who are testing the fish for their levels of Prozac.
Right.
So I'm also looking at it and saying, have we created a world that is too sped up for us to live in comfortably? Is that why we're so medicated? So I have a lot of questions that I ask, and I sometimes think that things we're meant to go through as a kind of spiritual crisis end up being diagnosed and medicated. I'm the daughter of a doctor, and so I came by these preoccupations naturally.
Well, it's certainly in the news a lot, but literature does a different thing than news reporting, and so it's very gratifying to hear you talk about your work and the focus of this next book. You hope it's coming out soon, which means...
It's with an agent right now.
Okay.
And so I'm just in that limbo where I'm waiting. But I have several other publishers who've expressed interest, and so I will find a way. I'm not long now.
And that one is called The Medicated Marriage.
Yes, The Medicated Marriage and Other Stories.
All right.
And the stories in that collection, all the stories in that collection are the ones that have won me the awards and the grants. So that's been affirming for me.
Yes, very. Your titles are very evocative, so let's turn now to the book that you published recently with She Books called Diary of a Slut. Tell us about the title first. Yeah,
I don't know why I choose these incredibly embarrassing titles. It seems to be a habit that I just can't break. I ask that of myself when I go on tour with my books and have to stand up and claim these things. But I think it's part of my decision to be an unapologetic and unladylike writer. I think with the advent of chick lit and hen lit, I think that there's the whole parameters where women are kind of writing novels of manners and morals, and they're seen as writing about the small domestic issues rather than about larger social issues of real import. I resist that. I don't have anything, I don't have a chip on my shoulder about chick lit. It's just I'm concerned that women who are writing books with some social and political grit to them are seen now as not fitting in that category. And so that category is becoming descriptive of all women's writing. And so that's a concern that I have. And I guess my titles are kind of in your face.
There's so much in our face that I can't even say one of them on the air. So I'll have people, I'll refer people to your website for that, which I forgot to read in your bio, and it is your name, KathrynTrueblood.com, correct?
Thank you. Yes,
and
KathrynTrueblood.com.
And Kathryn is spelled the Kathryn way. And Trueblood is Trueblood. I want to be sure people can find the title that I can't say on the air, but it was one of the award winners. So back to The Diary of a Slut. I know it was published with She Books, which has a different publishing scheme and model than our traditional publishing. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about the story and how it found She Books as its home and what that means to you as a writer.
Yeah, this story took me a long time to feel that I was entitled to write it. It takes place in one of those progressive hippie schools, so many of which were founded in the late 60s and early 70s. It takes place on an island off of the West Coast. But I'm really pleased and thrilled and excited by the existence of She Books. A friend of mine told me about it. She's involved with VITA, Suzanne Paola, which is an organization that tracks women's representation in print every year. And it's shocking, when you think about the Atlantic, New Republic, Nation, New Yorker, Harper's, and Sweeney's, all of them publish 75% men. And then women are left with Redbook and Cosmopolitan and the things where I don't feel like the fiction is, as I said, again, doesn't have a lot of heft and dimension. So I didn't know who was going to publish Diary of a Slut, plus it's long, it's a longer form. And so when my friend told me about She Books, I sent it there right away. They're a neat group of women running it. All of them have quite a track record. Laura Fraser is a novelist and a journalist. She's written for Vogue and Wired and Self, and Peggy Northrop worked at Sunset Magazine and Glamour, and they got a grant from the New Media Women's Entrepreneurial Fund and launched this thing, and then raised $50,000 on Kickstarter, and they now have, I believe, over 100 authors on there. I feel at home in there. I feel like I found a neighborhood. I could name a few names of other women writers there, but the issues that the women are writing about are things that are really, they're ethical, they're difficult. There's a story by Mary Jo McConaughey about two women war reporters in Central America. Molly Giles has written about women taking road trips who want to have fuller lives. Meg Wolitzer's there, Louise Erdrich, Hope Edelman, just a lot of different women. I found one of my favorite pieces was by Ariel Gore. She was the editor and publisher of Hip Mama. I don't know if you remember that magazine. After I read her piece, I ordered the memoir she wrote about having a very difficult mother called The End of Eve. And so having to take care of a very difficult mother at the end of her life. I feel at home, and I feel like there's really finally a place for women who are writing, not to say we don't all have sense of humor, but they're writing work that has some lasting social content.
Thank you. And so you heard about She Books from a friend, a writer friend, and then investigated and found the work they're doing. These are print or ebooks, or how are they distributed?
You can read them on a computer. You can read them even on your iPhone. You can read them on any kind of Nook. They're available through Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble, or you can go directly to the She Books website. And if you subscribe, it's $7.95, right, a month, and you can read as many books as you want. So it's pretty amazing. It's the old-fashioned idea of a subscription service,
right.
Or you can order one at a time for $2.99, and they're paying their writers, so they're doing pretty well.
You are listening to In Conversation, discussions on writing and the writing life on KPTZ 91.9 Port Townsend. Sheila Bender's interview with Kathryn Trueblood continues.
You never did tell us about The Diary of a Slut. The title tells us what's about, but tell us what it's about.
Okay. I think for me it's really about, it's one thing, it starts with a mother who's being asked by her daughter about her sex life. And so there's that huge gap. How do you convey an entire era to a child? That's pretty tough because values were so different than they are now. But it's also about something that I think women do, which is that they try to heal men with sex. And this was a time, the Vietnam War dominated a lot of my childhood, and there's a ghost story, there's several ghost stories contained in Diary of a Slut, and people were really haunted. They were brothers and sisters or nieces and nephews to men and women who'd gone to Vietnam. And so there's that sense of being haunted in the book and in the story, but there's also that kind of fine line between abandonment, this young woman who is very free to explore her sexuality, and on the other side of it, entrapment, because there's a young man who keeps coming to her dorm room, and sometimes he's on LSD, and he's really kind of on the line in terms of cracking up. And she doesn't really want to have sex with him, but that's what he thinks he needs. And so, it's just constantly that kind of trajectory between freedom and entrapment through sexuality. And I feel a lot for that girl in that story and in that place.
That is an amazing story because it encompasses so much about women and women's history, really. I mean, it's not a new idea that women heal men through sex. I mean, the ancient cultures, that's what some women were supposed to do for the returning warriors, take the war out of them.
Absolutely. That's what in my literature of war class, we talk about that. The promise of going to war and coming back and having apple pie mom and the girl next door. Very much with us.
And so in your story, The Diary of a Slut, does the girl who asks the question of her mother continue on in the story?
Oh, she does. The Medicated Marriage is a set of linked stories. And so their mother and the two children and the mother's father and the mother's mother, they all return in different stories that loosely refer back to each other. So I had fun with that.
Yeah.
Enjoyed that.
I am holding my breath, thinking about rushing home and subscribing to She Books and reading the story and all the other ones you mentioned. So I had a moment here where I'm imagining myself in my car driving home and going to my computer immediately. But now we'll go back to your work and the place of what you're writing in the literature of today, this unladylike, unapologetic writer that you are. Because you're a professor of literature and I think of writing.
I am, yes, both.
So your students must know your work to some extent. And how does
some
that?
Some of them do.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how that feels because the in-your-face titles and the willingness that you have to take on aspects of a woman's life that have previously perhaps not been out there so directly and getting as much attention. Does that influence your classroom situation?
I think it does. I established a 1960s literature course in response to my early sort of feminist views. You know, when I was in my 20s, I worked at Shameless Hussy Press, which was the first feminist press on the West Coast.
Another title, another in-your-face name.
Yeah, she gave me lots of time. And so I was in this tradition. You think about Erica Jong and the zipless sock, right? That was so I see myself as part of that. I also feel in my teaching, I want students to read this work that is abrasive in a way. I mean, there are people that intentionally are trying to offend a kind of middle-class sensibility or saying, look, our lives got so altered by war or whatever that we're never coming back to your set of values. And so I like the work that's feisty and scrappy. I want students to understand voices of social protest.
So your own writing has been influenced not only by the times, but I think by some writers who preceded you. I remember in an interview you gave that I read online, you mentioned Grace Paley and one other writer. And could you talk a little bit about their influence on you and when you came across them in your own studies and writing life?
Oh, absolutely. Well, when I was in school at UC Berkeley, an English degree still meant you read the canon of what came to be known as dead white males, but the European canon. And I had two women writers the entire time I was there that were introduced to me through the curriculum, and that was Sylvia Plath and Virginia Woolf, both of whom killed themselves. So this made me think I needed to get an early start on the self-destructive behavior. That was something I took away from it. But I was also very fortunate because I studied with Ishmael Reed. I got into his classes. You had to submit a manuscript to get into one of his classes. And he was running a nonprofit which was promoting and disseminating the work of multicultural writers, many of whom are huge now. We gave Louise Erdrich her first award for a collection of poems that she wrote. So it was a distributor of about 50 small presses, and they also had classes in multicultural literature. So I did both things. I interned with them, and I took their classes in multicultural American literature and realized that there are many simultaneous literatures in the United States. It's a false idea to the way they used to create anthologies at that time was, here are the African Americans, here's the Chicano lit, here's the Asian American, everything very separated. So I feel like I was really lucky to be involved in that conversation at that time. It influenced everything, and particularly how I teach as well. Thank
you. It's good to remember the beginnings of some of what we a little bit take for granted here, but not enough, I think, as according to you, but women are still underpublished in the major magazines. When you talk about chick lit and your belief that all writing by women is in danger of being categorized that way, tell me more about that. I mean, I have known a little magazine for girls called Chick Lit, and it was a magazine started by someone who wanted them to have good role models for being able to talk about the things that were real to girls. But I don't want to go see that movie. It's just a chick flick.
Right.
So says a man. What do you think about this name? And just tell us a little bit more. I mean, does your writing fall in there at this point in time because women are speaking up more, or does it not? Chick lit was created as a commercial category by publishers, really. I know that women like to take it back to Jane Austen and say that she's the mother of
chick lit. And Jane Austen's characters in her novels are primarily concerned with marrying well, right? With being matched up with the right man and with, I guess, the decisions that they're going to make about how much they will flaunt the conventions of society or how much they will exist within them. You know, the really big book was Helen Fielding's Bridget Jones. I think it sold 4 million copies, and it was very funny. I read it when I had a fever.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Jennifer Weiner, I don't know how you say her name, she's gone on to publish a lot. But there's a kind of formula to it, which is women looking for the anxiety of not being able to find a man, being a career girl, not being able to find a man. So I guess I don't think about it anymore. I mean, I joke. I call some of these novels, I call them novels with canoes on the covers. You know, there's always the dock, and there's the lake, and then there's a canoe, and it's at sunset.
Uh-huh.
So, I'm bad. My interests are just not there. But for a while, I felt that it was very hard for me to find writers. I mean, you talk about Grace Paley, and she was very concerned with her time and her day. Virginia Woolf wrote Three Guineas, which is really an amazing treatise on war. Some of the older writers that I like, some of the ones I really care about now, Janet Fitch, I think, is amazing. Jeanette Walls. I like the subjectivity of women's voices, and I want to hear that. I want to hear passionate voices. I love Edna O'Brien as well, and Marguerite Duras, and you know, they're kind of tough in a way, and I think that women shouldn't be afraid to be tough-minded. Right, we were having that whole discussion about what it means to be called bossy. If a girl's being called bossy, that's a bad thing. But it's not. I mean, women get called that if they're motivated, if they have aspirations.
Yes, and I'm an oldest in my family. I'm always called bossy, but now I can say that's a good thing.
That's right. You last longer.
So I want to ask you about your own book covers. Is there a cover of yours, or more than one, that you think really speaks to this not lake, canoe, sunset idea?
I love the cover. I love the cover of Diary of a Slut. You have this woman dancing in this kind of shadow light with her arms over her head. It's very like a spiral, very spidery. It takes both. It has the magenta color. Now, it's interesting. I had kind of a difficult time when my book, The Baby Lottery, was published because it was magenta. And that was the magenta and teal, or pink and teal, were very much the colors of chick lit. But you can only go so far. Other colors didn't work. That was what my publisher wanted to do. I had that in an interview with a very kind of cranky guy who said, asked me about my cover, and I just joked and said it's pussy pink, and left it at that. Both of my books have spermatozoa swimming across the cover, so I'm the only author I know that has sperm on the cover of her book. And
well, Kathryn,
good or bad.
Kathryn, before we close the program, I really would like to give you the opportunity to read an excerpt from a book, and I think maybe particularly Diary of a Slut. And
yes,
we can
I would love to read.
Think of the image you gave us of the cover as we listen.
Mom, my daughter says, what age were you when you lost your virginity? Do I want to tell her? No, I was a year older than she is. I was 14. Do I tell her? Yes. It was not a happy thing, I say. I wouldn't wish it for you. She wants to know everything then and there, but she doesn't get to. At 14, I attended an alternative school on an island off the West Coast, a 1970s equivalent of the democratically run Summerhill School in England, except that drugs, sex, and absolute chaos forced its closure in less than 2 years. As students of Salvatore Island School, we knew the canyons and coves with our feet and slipped out of our dormitories like the lithe shadows we were when the evening dorm check had passed. Then we congregated in the canyons to revel, drinking tequila sunrises in tennis ball cans. We kayaked to town on booze runs. We sailed to remote coves to enact our own version of Lena Wertmüller's Swept Away. The remoteness of the island untamed us all, if teenagers are ever really domesticated. When the rains came and washed out the roads, the faculty became lovers with their students. The students had shower parties in the dormitories, and wild boar roamed the halls. On Salvatore Island, we saw ourselves as a microcosm of utopia, a tribe of a small planet. At the school, we didn't trust any governance but our own. The student body held town meetings in the library and locked the doors. No faculty allowed. I remember how a thief was dealt with. We sweated and breathed this air of swollen volumes in the library while the dorms were being searched by upperclassmen. A senior named Ryan ran the meeting and commanded guards to the French door so that no one could leave. I thought Ryan looked like Bob Dylan because he had a frazzle of hair and a bent inward look and seemed not to want the cowl of authority. Their perpetrator confessed, broke down crying. Punishments and reparations were determined by student vote in front of him. I sat in my homemade wraparound skirt and halter top, inwardly quivering because I had never taken part in absolute rule. When we voted, the perpetrator was sent off the island, with or without faculty consent. The fragility of our society on the island was mirrored in its history. Indians, smugglers, gold miners, and traders who came before us. Those specters who conceded to the dirt, but not to rest. Never that. Islands are different that way, full of marooned ghosts. We were convinced of it.
Thank you, Kathryn. We're going to have to end now, but I know I'm going home to get that book and read it. It's very evocative of the times and of the untamed adolescence that we live. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I want to remind people that they can find out more about you and your work at KathrynTrueblood.com. Thank you.
And I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn and everything else. Thank you so much, Sheila.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You have been listening to In Conversation, Discussions on Writing and the Writing Life with Sheila Bender. For more of Sheila's interviews, please go to Sheila's website, www.writingitreal.com/audio.
In Conversation is produced by Sheila Bender and edited by Charlie Fleischman. Production coordinator is Mike Schlexer.